request to compute. Right. We began by talking about how the Phoenicians had invented the alphabet and were also in the trade routes making use of the color purple, which was extremely rare and expensive and could only be worn by emperors and so forth. And here we see a school child's alphabet written backwards, because you could write the alphabet backwards and forwards as Hebrew is, and so forth. And this is the murex shell which produced the purple dye. But later on, I will explain how women came up with something which was not expensive and very easy to do with the same beautiful color. In 2001, I organized an international conference on the alphabet and the Bible, the first in our series on the city and the book, with Jewish, Russian, Irish, Icelandic, Spanish, English, and Italian scholars. And we discussed how the alphabet and the Bible came from outside of Europe, yet which are the basis of our culture. We began with the Phoenician letters along trade routes that became the Etruscan letters and the Scandinavian runes, reaching even to Iceland. And here we show the development of the alphabet. Sorry about this repetition. And you can see how the Phoenician letters become the Etruscan letters, which become the Scandinavian runes, while the Latin letters incised on stone, which are also the letters that we're using on this computer screen even today, had a separate development which got taken over into Christianity, while the runes remained in the pagan world. And then we talked about how King Josiah was cleaning up the first temple. It had become paganized. And he discovered in a cupboard that had been forgotten the lost Torah. And he sent for Huldah, who was the woman prophetess, to ask what should be done. And she said, it's too late. You will die, all right, but the people will go into captivity. But you must read this Torah to all the children, women, and men, which they did. Following that was the Babylonian exile. And then at the return, Ezra and Nehemiah do the same, reading the Torah. And what's fascinating is that the Samaritans still have that Torah, and they still exist. And I'm going to switch over into that. Here they are. There are very few of them, but they still have the oldest Torah. And the Hebrew Bible problem is that it didn't really survive in the ancient copies, because when it became too old to continue using, it had to be buried as if it were a human body in the earth. And so only a few copies have survived, apart from the Qumran scrolls. We have the Aleppo Codex, and then we have the first Christian Bibles, the Bodmer Papyrus. And then in Vercelli in 370, which is unbelievable, you have Eusebius of Vercellensis writing the old Latin Bible, which is not yet the Jerome Vulgate. And then Jerome, in his cave in Bethlehem, being assisted in this task by the Roman ladies, wealthy Roman ladies who gave up everything to do the job, he scorns these purple Bibles, which are so elegant. Habeant veteres libros vel in membranis purpureis, auro argentoque, in gold and silver descriptos, vel uncialibus beautiful letters, ut vulgo aiunt, litteris honora magis, exarata quam codices pauperes, scidulas et non tam pulchros codices quam emendatus. So he is scornful of these gorgeous books. And here we see the Codex Vaticanus, the Bible in Greek. And this is the Codex Sinaiticus, which is in the British Library. which was in St. Catherine's Monastery and discovered in the 19th century. And the Codex Alexandrinus, again in Greek. And then we have the Cotton Genesis. This is a purple Bible. Unfortunately, it was very badly burnt. It's probably based on Origen's hexapla, where you have the columns in Greek and Hebrew. And these are the purple Bibles with gold letters. This is the Codex Veronensis. And this is fascinating because this is the very ancient Bible in Gothic. No, that one isn't. The other one will be. The Wolfilla Bible. Here it is. And these arcades at the bottom are based on those which were Justinian's palace and so forth. This is the Lord's Prayer in Gothic. And in my website, you can actually click on the sound image and hear it being read. It sounds wonderful in Stockholm. So is there somebody? Here we go. Can you hear it?
No. No.
Julia, you have to tell it you want to share the sound. I'm not sure how you can do it in the recording.
So we'll abandon that. And here you can see in the mosaic what Justinian's palace was like. And here you see it in the manuscript. And also in Ravenna was the Arian baptistry, the Wolfilla Bible, for which he invented a different alphabet, is an Arian Bible. These are people who are like the modern Unitarians. They don't believe in the Trinity. But if you can see the naked river god beside Jesus as he's being baptized by John. And then we come to the Vienna Genesis, which is Greek and Byzantine. And here again, you will see by the fountain where Rebecca comes with her water pot, the naked woman who represents the waters, the well. And because they had the sense of all nature as being imbued still with the pagan deities as well as being Christian. And this is where they're feeding the camels. And then the Sinope Codex, which is Greek and Byzantine, again, purple vellum pages with gold letters. And this is the most wonderful one. This is in Rosanna, and it's Greek and Byzantine with the most beautiful illuminations, which show us what it was like in the Byzantine Empire, how they still dressed in togas and so forth. And this is the story of the Good Samaritan, where the Good Samaritan is Jesus. And here is Jesus with the wise and foolish virgins. And if somebody could mute themselves. And here again, we see Palm Sunday with Jesus on the donkey coming into Jerusalem. And I love the people leaning out of the house windows. And then the cleansing of the temple. And you can even see the dove flying away from the cage and so on. This is the raising of Lazarus. And let's see if I can.
Non c'è un parcheggio lì vicino che più.
There is some talking. I don't know where it's coming from. And here are the apostles with the resurrected Christ, no, before the resurrection. This is Gethsemane in the darkness of the night. I don't know whose the voice is. And this again is before Pilate. And you can see the two emperors on the front of the table, the images of them. And here they lead Jesus towards for the judgment. And this is Judas coming to the priest. Could everyone mute themselves? And then he hangs himself on the tree. Now, the throne on which you saw the priest It's the same as Maximinianus throne in the
That's the only thing.
in Ravenna, brought from Constantinople.
Okay.
I'm
somehow
I'm
I have to get to the
I wish
I think it's Anne. I think Anne must be speaking to someone.
Right. Anne, could you mute yourself? Right. Okay, we'll carry on. And here again, you can see also St. Mark with either the Virgin or a patron, one patron, coming to him. Right. And then this again is another purple gospel, again on the purple vellum with the gold letters. And again, another one, this one is in Albania now. And at the same period, the Quran for the Muslim believers was vocalized, and the Hebrew Bible had not been. So in Galilee, the rabbis then vocalized the Hebrew text as well, because they were asked by the Khazars who were trying to choose whether to be Christian or Jewish, to have the form of the Bible that non-mother, how do you say madrelingua, non-native speakers could read. It was easy for a Jew who knew the pronunciation to understand the missing vowels, but it wasn't easy for a foreigner. So the Jewish scholars then did the pointing above and below the letters to signify what the vowels were. And at the same time, Cyril and Methodius had arrived in the Crimea to study Hebrew. And so when they went on to Rome, they then invented the Glagolitic, and they were from Bulgaria, as had been Wulfila, who had already invented the Gothic alphabet. They invented the Glagolitic alphabet, which became the Cyrillic alphabet of the Russian and Slavic languages. So here we've got the story of Hulda's cupboard, which had been in the temple. And I find this story fascinating because this is the first evidence in the Bible of the study of theology of the scriptures. And it's initiated by a woman. And only two people are buried in Jerusalem. One is King David, and the other is the prophetess Huldah. And we get the story of how Josiah sends to ask what to do to Hilkiah. And then he goes with the others to Huldah, the prophetess, the wife of Shallum, the son of Tikva, the son of Haras, keeper of the wardrobe. Now she dwells in Jerusalem in the college, and they decide with her what to do. And what I find fascinating is that the story is recalled by St. Jerome when he speaks to Saints Paula and Eustacia, mother and daughter. And it's also mentioned by the Abbess Hilda of Whitby, whose name is so similar to Hulda's, and also by the Franciscan speaking with Angela da Foligno, and by the Bishop Hermit Alfonso Jaen speaking of St. Birgitta of Sweden. But I find modern theologians who tend to be white male Anglo-Saxon have forgotten the story. They've whitewashed it out. It's not there. But in early Christianity, it was the religion of women and slaves. And this is the tomb of Veneranda in the Roman catacombs, being escorted by Saint Petronilla. She is St. Paul's daughter. I remember that almost all of the apostles, except for Paul, she's St. Peter's daughter, were married and had families. And what's interesting here, let's see, we've got everyone in. What's interesting here is that we see here a codex, a bound book. But here we've got a capsa, kind of bucket of leather with all of these scrolls inside it, because this was before really the bound book had taken over. It's too early. And then we have in the tomb of Galla Placidia, again, a woman. This is in Ravenna in the 5th century. And we see beside St. Lawrence, and I gave this lecture actually in San Lorenzo here in Florence, right where the Codex Amiatinus is kept. But here you see the cupboard with Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John, the 4 Gospels in it, and which reminds us of the cupboard in which the Torah was kept. And then again, we get in the Codex Amiatinus, we get the cupboard with the Bible, with all of the books in it. And presumably this is not Huldah so much as it is Ezra when he came back from the Babylonian exile. And then this cupboard, the 3rd one, is in San Salvatore in Monte Amiata, and it's where the Codex Amiatinus was kept for centuries. And then it was arrived with Napoleon in the Laurentian Library. So we get this theme of cupboards going on. And we see how these Bibles, at first they were in the more exotic Black Sea area around Constantinople. And then that learning with Cassiodorus, Ravenna, and so forth, that library is bought by the Anglo-Saxon monks, and they bring it to Northumbria. And this brings about these magnificent Bibles in the British Isles, as well as having been in Ireland, which eventually will be used to restore the correct biblical texts, because the version that St. Jerome had put together was almost lost, except around the periphery. And so we see this huge map with the Black Sea and Italy and the British Isles and Iceland. I had to especially look for this on Google to create it and then draw it to show these voyages that have been made by books, by alphabets, and so on. And then the British Isles and Ireland. The Irish were Christian before the Anglo-Saxons. They Christianized the Anglo-Saxons. And when Bernard Meehan, who was the head of the Trinity College Library and the keeper of the Book of Kells, he kept me in touch with their findings. And they discovered in a bog this psalter in a book satchel, which is just like the books in Egypt. And it even had Egyptian papyri on the binding. And here we see an Armenian book satchel, and then also an Icelandic one. This is called the Old Grey one, and I saw it in Iceland. And then St. Columba, I'm sorry I read that incorrectly. This is the Cathach. It's a psalter. It's probably not the original one, but he was known to have created this. And he founds Iona. And then from Iona, you get Lindisfarne founded, and St. Cuthbert. Here we see him taken, this is the later miniature, into the monastery as an oblate by Bösel, who is his teacher. And then he meets the later abbess of Whitby, the successor to Hilda. And when he's buried, he's only a bishop for 2 years. He's buried with his pectoral cross, which survives. And his coffin has carved on it these figures, which are like those, and you see here, when they hold the Bible, it's held in cloth. It's so sacred. And that's the Rathwell cross. Also, this book of St. John's Gospel was in his coffin on Lindisfarne, and it had to be brought to Durham for safety from the Vikings. Now, the Rathwell Cross in Scotland is this marvelous mixture of Celtic themes and Pictish sculptures, and also Byzantine ones. I saw this inhabited vine sculpture in Ravenna, And there it is again in the Rothel Cross and the Bewcastle Cross, and also at Wearmouth Jarrow with Bede and Shelfrith. It's quite extraordinary, this voyaging from the east to the west of these motifs. And then the pilgrim brings this manuscript, this Anglo-Saxon manuscript, to Vercelli. I can remember getting off the train early in the morning and going to the cathedral to look at this manuscript. And The Dream of the Rune is a wonderful poem, and it's written in runes on the Rothel Cross, and then later on parchment here, and then even later on silver on the Brussels cross with the relic of the Holy Cross. And then the Codex Amiatinus itself, its original first folio is on purple vellum with gold letters giving the index. And that tells us that probably the book they were copying from, the Codex Grandior of Cassiodorus, that they had brought from Ravenna and Vivarium to Northumbria, was probably a purple gospel. And here we see in the Codex Amiatinus, Ezra carefully writing out the Bible, which had been lost during the Babylonian exile, and now it's reconstructed for the Second Temple, and you see the book covered behind him. And also you see on it these birds, and the birds in Hebraic art, because you weren't meant to show human forms, symbolize the angels, the cherubim of the Shekinah. And you see that motif in the mosaics in Ravenna and so on. And here's the Codex Amiatinus and its beautiful writing. And then in Ireland and in England, you get in the Lindisfarne Gospel, you get these magnificent carpet pages, which are copying the Muslim carpets, which, like books, traveled and were often used in Christian churches and so forth. And here we get the four beasts, the angel, the lion, the ox, and the eagle. And if you can see here, this is the St. Cuthbert's coffin with the four beasts. And here they are again in the Book of Kells. And here you see the Madonna and Child. And here you see the Madonna and Child in the Book of Kells. This is quite extraordinary because one is Ireland, Iona, Dublin, and the other is Lindisfarne and Durham, and two different islands. And here we get 3 different islands. Here we get Boniface writing to Leoba and Walberger, these English nuns who were sent off on the German mission, asking for copies of purple gospels with gold letters. And here, even late in the 9th century in Bavaria, you see that tradition continuing. And this one I find fascinating. This is the Codex Argentius, which was stolen by the Vikings, ransomed back for Canterbury during King Alfred's reign. Now it's in Stockholm, and it mixes Irish and Anglo-Saxon aspects. And then Iceland. This is the Thingvellir. I went here with my student who invited me. And this is where the open air parliament was held for 1,000 years, and where they decided unanimously in the year 1000 for all of the Vikings to become Christian on the island. And this is a Viking map of Jerusalem. And if you look at the roofs, those are not the flat roofs of a Mediterranean city. Those are Scandinavian roofs, you know, for snow. And it's absolutely fascinating because the map is correct as far as the buildings are concerned, but not correct as far as their architecture. What's also fascinating are the 2 maps above, where they actually show that there is land on the other side, America, because the Vikings did reach America. And one of them she had a child born in America long before Christopher Columbus. And this is the Stjorn book, which is again, it's an Icelandic Bible, and this is the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham, with the ram caught in the tree branch. Here you see the ram that is substituted by the angel stopping the sword. Now, the Icelandic priests went to study at the Victorine convent in Paris. So they were very much up on the. And I bring you now to the Norwich Castle manuscript, where you see again purple and gold. This is a tradition that carried on all over Europe. If you wanted to do your most sacred book in the most beautiful way possible, those were the colors you chose. And here again, we see how this has traveled all across this globe. Now, I was hoping very much that Tatiana would be with us. She wrote a splendid thesis on the marginalia in Bulgarian manuscripts, complaining about their bad treatment from the Ottoman Turks, how it was so cold, how they were so poor. But they had this rich tradition with their Glagolitic script of gorgeous manuscripts. And here she and I were able to help preserve some of these manuscripts, which were in an ecclesiastical library in Sofia, being eaten by rats, and we had to send the money and the equipment for their restoration, but they're magnificent manuscripts. And then she, in turn, was doing the most beautiful artwork based on these designs. Here you see the four apostles, and her name is Tatiana Nikolova Houston. And she was also invited to do this beautiful illustration for Avo Part's Adam's Lament. And I'm hoping she will give us her presentation on Orthodox iconography. She's written a paper called Bright Sorrow. And here's more of her work, and you can see how the purple vellum has influenced her. Now, we talked about Lydia from Tyre in the Acts of the Apostles as one of the people who created purple from the murex shell. And here you see the Emperor Justinian and the Empress Theodora dressed in their gorgeous purple robes. And my aunt wrote this wonderful book on dyeing from lichens, vegetable dyes. She did all of the research, and you can find these gorgeous purple colors from lichens on gravestones, on stone walls. You don't have to use the very expensive murex. So I put this into the talk. And what was fascinating was that Tatiana and I and several others, we went up to Monte Amiata to give a talk on the Irish and Anglo-Saxon Bibles. And I gave to Monte Amiata the relic of St. Cuthbert and a little piece of his coffin. They're very, very tiny in this little container here on gold leaf. And they were placed in a reliquary and then placed in the cupboard where previously the Codex Amiatinus had been. There's two monasteries so close together, Lindisfarne and Wearmouth Jarrow. And this is Father Nathaniel, who did the icon for me of Julian of Norwich, which I have here, and who also gave me this relic. And here is his letter describing how he and a group of other Greek Orthodox monks were visiting Durham, and an Anglican clergyman actually gave them a piece of the relic of the bone and of the coffin, the wood, and they divided it up amongst themselves, and he gave me a small portion of it, which I then gave to Monte Amiata. And here is Tatiana with the cupboard with the reliquary in it. This is the reliquary of St. Cuthbert. But was once the cupboard which contained the Codex Amiatinus, the most authoritative Jerome Bible in the Latin Church. And these are the columns in the crypt of Monte Amiata's monastery. And you can see the wonderful intertwines like Irish work in stone carving. And also when they changed the altar, out tumbled a beautiful Irish reliquary with all of these intertwines there in the mountains above Siena. And here we are. This is me hiding behind a column. And this is where they gave me this, I'm not sure we can see it, this icon of the face of Christ. And I've been fascinating that my cell is filling up with images of Christ's face. Now I've written this book called In God's Image. Juliana Dresvina, who's from Russia, gave me this first icon. My catechist, who was all of 23, Suor Maria Chiara, who is now a Carmelite nun, painted this one of the Luca Volto Santo. And then this third one is what I was given in exchange for the relic of St. Cuthbert. And our conference proceedings of the first Citian book at Florin MS Aleph. And then the ninth one is Florin MS CB and 9 in Roman numerals. And also, I feel rather sad about this. I did a Bessarion without an audience because I wanted to get it off my chest, this rather difficult topic on plagiary among the scholars and the gendering of editions, because so often we women work many years on an edition and then the men plagiarize it. And so I showed 3 examples of this being done, 4 actually, in protest. So now we can say thank you. We can find, if we can find the gallery. Right, there we are. I'm sorry about all of the problems of tonight. I do want to add that, let's see if we can make the gallery even better. Can we? Is there a way of doing it better? I don't know. All the shekels are here from the group that was okay. Let's see if we can do anything.
Julia, you need to stop your screen sharing to be able to see the gallery.
Okay, interrompe. Right, good. Okay, good. This book, when I did the alphabet in the Bible, the head of the British Library, who didn't want to let me know that he was rather impressed, then did this exhibition following it called Sacred, where he brought together Islamic manuscripts, Jewish manuscripts, and Catholic manuscripts. It was glorious. And you could see how each was borrowing from the other. We all plagiarized all over the map. But it was an absolutely wonderful exhibition. And I just feel, living in the world of books and seeing that they are actually, computers. They're the technology of the past that could transform the human voice into a means of communication that you could see instead of hear, and transport across time and space. Where would we have been without it? And what I'm saying now to the students when I tell them about Mary Somerville and Ada Lovelace, because I always ask them, who invented the computer? And there's silence, nobody knows. Somebody might say Turing, but they're never going to say Mary Somerville and Ada Lovelace. And I say, look at your telefonini, your cell phones. Imagine what your life would be like, as ours had been without these. And it goes back to the invention of 2 women. And we sort of we don't teach this in the schools. And I think if we did give more of the presence of women's inventiveness, Hulda and so forth, Ada Lovelace and so on, it's quite fascinating. In the paper that I wrote, and I didn't read it because it's rather boring reading a paper, but the list of women that showed up in this research on the books was extraordinary. We were really present. The Vulgate wouldn't have come into being without Paula and Eustachium, who studied Hebrew along with Jerome to translate the Bible and funded the whole project and gave up everything to do it, living in a cave with Jerome in Bethlehem. I've seen the cave. And that's what I've also found fascinating, is that I've done the travels of the books. I haven't gone to the Black Sea yet, or Istanbul, but I've gone to Jerusalem, I've gone to St. Catherine's, I've gone to Iceland, and I just feel that that is the way a scholar should be, the sort of the tangible places, instead of only being in an ivory tower and so on. Okay, it's time for all of us to speak. Welcome, Kat.
Alex.
Yes, Alex.
So, Julia, is always just wonderful, this. And in some ways, what you're saying builds from the last time, that extraordinary one on the keeping of the word, if you will, through all of these nuns in exile. And here we have this ancient root,
Yes.
of sacred texts. But what I find so interesting is the commonality is the cupboard, which is
Yes.
there's nothing more sacred. So if we think of purple and we think of the Roman legions, of the most purple patrician identification with that, and this cupboard of, Ezra, and of the most sacred of texts. And yet you think you've made this case, I think, wonderfully, that this also involved a lot of women, and that the women, it is what is more familiar to us than a cupboard.
Right.
So I love the tension of that. And I just had one question, which is with the purple Gospels. I remember when you gave, alas wasn't there, but I remember when you gave this talk in San Lorenzo, and I was thinking purple Gospels, and you meant it quite literally. So was the gold done in gold leaf?
Yes.
Oh my God, that must have been so.
I know. Well, you must be extravagant for God. And so forth. And I love that Laura is wearing purple.
So
You're muted, Laura. Unmute. And Angela too. Yes, Laura. You're still muted. Yes.
So I never wear purple, but my mother gave me this shirt and I needed something to go with it. And then I thought, oh, well, this is the day of the Purple Gospel lecture, so I'll wear it today.
Right. And Angela.
Well, it's just so wonderful. I love these. This is like stepping into another world for me. It's so wonderful. And how were these books used? Were they part of the readings at a religious service, or were they personal devotional, or were they just for show? I'm just curious how
I think
it's beautiful.
Yes, it's a combination of everything. We know that Chilfrith not only has the Codex Amiatinus, which he struggles to give to Rome. I mean, here you've got the periphery bringing the Bible back to the center of Christianity. And he dies on the journey. He's in his 70s and he doesn't make it. But somehow the book manages to get at least as far as Monte Amiata. Doesn't make it all the way to Rome. And then you will have Aeneas Piccolomini coming and checking it for to do the proper Vulgate Bible, because everyone realized at that time they didn't think it was Anglo-Saxon, because somebody had plagiarized, had pretended that it was actually a Lombard Bible. And then it was a librarian in the Laurentian who realized, no, it is the Chelfrith Bible. But he also had 2 other copies made, not so big as this one. It's huge. It takes 2 men to lift it. And he had the other 2 copies, one at Weymouth and one at Jarrow, in the chapel, so that it was used for the readings and so on. And they took so much parchment and so on. Parchment is much more durable than paper. I mean, when I'm sitting in a library with a parchment manuscript, I don't have to feel nervous. It's tough and it will last much better than our modern books with their acid in the paper. But they can get eaten by rats and so on and so forth, and which we saw happening with the Bulgarian manuscripts, which are so beautiful. And I really love getting to know more about that side of Europe, because we've sort of been cut off from the Greek side for too long. And I love what comes through to me with the yes, I should have kept it. I was given this lovely icon from Yash. There are quite a few more images of God in my cell, and one of them was given to me by the Roma gardener, the older one, who bought this at Yash at the festival of Santa Parasheva, and it's a gorgeous icon with silver and the beautiful face and so on. And but that fascinated me, is why is my cell filling up with this image, when I've also done this book on In God's Image about the left and right hemispheres and so forth, mirrored in our faces and so on. So to me, this has been interesting, and the links, with the purple and gold, even in the Norwich Castle manuscript.
So, Julia, what got you started with the ancient manuscript studies? Where did you begin?
Well, I got asked to do a paper on the Rossano Gospels for at San Lorenzo, and I gave it in Italian because the person Renato Stoppani, who does a lot of work on pilgrimage, he's been publishing quite a lot of my books, and I translate for him. And someone from Rossano wanted to do a talk on the Rossano Gospels. So I got called in to explain the context, which meant I did the research, most of it on the web. The material's there if you know how to look for it. And I found it absolutely fascinating, realizing that you could tie it together with Lydia and the purple dyes, and then my aunt's work and so forth. We went to stay with her, my children and I, and she was teaching them how to dye sheep's wool that we would find on the hedges with these wonderful lichen dyes. And that book actually that she wrote, and she was very rebellious, a brilliant hermit. She never finished schooling, but she, corresponded with scholars worldwide. And that book gets far more recognition than any of my books. And, I put it on Academia Edu, and it's read everywhere, all over India, China, and so on and so forth. Because
what book is that, Julia? What book is that?
On vegetable lichen dyeing, on how to dye textiles.
Okay.
And a lot of Americans look at it and so on and so forth. And we still in Florence do this dyeing of silk with the natural lichen dyes. And that's still being those beautiful colors you see in Renaissance paintings. They don't fade. They're much better than our modern chemical dyes. Organic, like our book, paper marbling. Right. Anne Barbetti, you're the one who knows about textiles.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yes.
We can't
Okay.
see you.
No, I know I can't I could see myself before, but I couldn't see you. So now I can see you and I don't see myself, but
Okay.
that's all right.
Right.
No, I think that there's a date in, I think it's 1860, if I'm not mistaken, when they switched over from the natural dyes to the chemical dyes.
Yes,
If I am not mistaken, I think that's the
that's
date.
right. Yes.
I have some information here in the house, as a matter of fact, on dyes. I might put it together and show it to you.
Mm.
And then there's always so many things that you talk about, and I say, oh, I have to ask about this, have to ask about that, and then I'm getting old, so I forget what it was I was going to ask.
Right. And when they did the study of the Rosanna Gospels, they found that it was not Murex, that it was the natural vegetable dyes.
Natural vegetable.
And so, you know.
Also, I wanted to show you I wanted to show you that you have all those icons. You have all those, the collection. I want to show you one I have in embroidery. Maybe
Lovely.
I did show it to you, but I'll show it to you again.
Yes.
And it's strange because I think the embroidery, I'm pretty sure the embroidery was done in Florence, but all the thing about the embroidery seems quite Byzantine.
Right.
And so I can't, I'm trying to figure out how we get from Rome to Florence at a time when anything before Giotto is out.
Right, right. Well, remember that in Rome on Easter Friday, they showed the Veronica veil. And actually, I mean, Timothy Burton made a mistake once when he said the Veronica story of St. Veronica is in the Bible. It's not. It's an invention.
Not,
no. And Graba talks about how it's playing off Vera icon, the true image.
Yes.
And then the legend of Veronica placing, Tatiana, right. She's
good.
Yes. Tatiana is in Texas. She's from Bulgaria, and she's now connecting with the audio, and I hope she also connects with the visual, the video. Welcome, Tatiana. We've been talking so much about you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Right. And
we began a lot of errands to run today with the exhibit setting, so I'm sorry about that.
That's fine. You're doing the exhibition right now.
Yes.
So everything was piling on top of everything else today here as well. We're running into all kinds of bureaucratic problems. But Tatiana, your work is it's absolutely intriguing. And they have seen some of the images of your work. And we're hoping that perhaps next time you can do your paper.
Okay.
Right. Because I really want other voices in the academia. We've been doing this every month and discussing scholarly topics. And I found Tatiana when I was putting together the conference on the city and the book, the first one on the Bibles. And she had a website about these Bulgarian Glagolitic Bibles in this library with rats and so on and so forth, and no money. And so together I was able to help with our association with some money for it. And how is that collection now, Tatiana?
Well, I guess they're doing well. We donated, as you know, a computer, a scanner, and then renovated the whole facility. This is the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, their museum and archive. So it has 1,500 manuscripts from mostly Slavic, Bulgarian, and Greek, and some Armenian, some Jewish, that sort of thing, mostly created during the Ottoman times. So you contributed a lot, and the Order of St. Ignatius gave me $10,000. So we were able to renovate the whole facility with new shelves and repaint and boxes, archival boxes from England, that sort of thing. That was 2001, I think.
Yes, that's the year we did the conference, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It changed my life completely, afterwards my dissertation, and
Mhm.
started with this illuminations after I graduated and could not find a job with the PhD. So,
Well, I
great.
think, Tatiana, you and I have found it's actually better being outside of academia than in.
Yeah, I believe you're my mentor, and I you told me just be wise as snakes and good as the doves, and better be out of academia. So I will never forget that.
Yes,
Because
yes, yes.
I tried to present something in academia, and there was completely indifference and ridicule. There's revisionism going on there,
And
and
it's so shallow. It doesn't
yeah,
really do the deep things. They get scared
yeah.
when you do the deep things. That's when they really hound you out.
Yeah. They have political agenda,
Yes,
that's
right, right. And
go fit their political
that's
agenda.
right. And but your work now, you're doing these beautiful images, and they are stunning. And
Thank you. Well,
and I also find you and I are also doing. We're saying that our work, it doesn't have to be only academic. It's
Mhm.
also
Grassroots.
healing, which I don't think academia is meant to be doing.
Mhm.
You were talking about that wonderful image you did of the bridge when your mother was dying,
Yeah.
so forth, and I sort of have been finding is I've just finished a paper on Dante and the body. And in it, it was kind of fascinating because it came out. We were doing a Zoom on Dante and the body and medicine from the University of Pisa. And at the end of the discussion, they were talking about Robert Derling, talking about the figure of Satan as the body in the Inferno. And I was saying, but there's masculine bodies, but in the Paradiso, what you get is the baby nursing at the mother's breast, the milk
Yeah.
in its mouth,
Mhm.
and so forth. And you get that image again and again and again. And so what Dante does is to go from the masculine body, and he's actually right, in the groin of Satan and so forth. And then you end up with the baby at the mother's breast.
Well, that's Virgin Mary with
To the
Christ
female.
child.
And I put the paper together, and I put it
Yeah.
on Academia Edu. And of course, one person, said, I'll leave you to your arrogance. And, because you're not meant to talk about, I actually did talk about having had 3 sons who nursed at my breast. And I was talking about St. Bernard, the legend of St. Bernard, where a Bernard is praying to the Virgin and asking to be shown the Virgin. And the milk spouts out from her breast into Bernard's mouth.
Mhm.
You get this extraordinary image. And I said, it happens. I've seen
Yeah.
it happen with mine. And of
Mhm.
course, the male scholars were horrified. You're not meant to talk about this.
Yeah, but I have to say, Julia, I have to say that you don't feel comfortable with the response you get from other people in the academic world, but you have all the research skills you have because you were trained in that world.
Yes, that's true.
And I'm a little jealous of that. I wasn't trained in that world, so I'm glad that you didn't totally let go of everything that you learned there just because you left it. But yeah, You have a lot of skills that came from
And
that world.
Tatiana's like that. I mean, her work is absolutely beautiful images, which she's got these Swarovski diamonds in it and so on and so forth. But they're based on this extreme knowledge of the glagolitic texts and alphabets and the manuscript illuminations. So they're both extremely creative and at the same time extremely scholarly. And I think they that is a good direction to go in, where you can actually be playful with scholarly materials and arrive at something that is perhaps deeper or more knowledgeable about them than if you study them with the white lab coat. The detached observer. I don't think you get very far in that mode. So I hope I haven't shocked you. And so, and Luke was going to try to be here tonight, and so we fortunately, thanks to I think it was Laura, somebody reminded me to start recording this. Otherwise, I would have completely forgotten. I was so scatterbrained. More comments? Yes.
Well, what about the next topic?
Um,
We're always so anxious for the next one. When we finish one topic,
oh
we
dear,
want to
right.
get started on the next one.
Yes. Well, there's a possibility of Tatiana's paper. Here she is, right, Tatiana.
Hi.
Yes. And Babetti, when will your embroidery paper be ready? Your book?
I'm not even, I asked my daughter to call the editor because he doesn't answer me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been September. I haven't heard a word. So I'm asking my daughter to get in touch.
Right.
Because I don't know if it's just because he doesn't know how to go about doing it because it's so revolutionary, or if it's just because he's decided he doesn't want to do it. And I'm anxious to put it on a Zoom and
Mm-hmm. Yes.
publish it even independently and somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think it's so important.
Right.
So we'll
Mm-hmm.
see.
Right. It is difficult to know how to publish things, and if you try to get it, I mean, I've never been able to publish a book with a university press, apart from, well, Anna Lecter Cartusiana wasn't, it was the University of Salzburg, but it wasn't, it was sort of an independent scholar, former Carthusian monk, who was the editor of that press. It's a wonderful press. And I'm really sad to have lost him, James Hogg, with his 100-year-old parrot. And he was great. And he would answer the telephone, Hogg here, and so forth. He was a Scottish nobleman who'd become a monk. And there's some wonderful characters that are sort of on the fringes of the academic world, but who are extremely productive in the work that they do, and also receptive to women as well, supportive, which is unusual in the mainstream, I think. And I'm now working on a book. I didn't like doing the previous talk, which I didn't have an audience for, on plagiary. I don't know if Alex, if you looked at it.
No, I didn't. I'm hoping, you and I are going to be involved in the children, the trafficking, the
Right.
change.
Yes, this other, I'm sort of feeling at this point that I really need to, there's a concept in Greek called paresia, the obligation to speak the truth at personal risk for the common good. And Foucault was Okay.
Julia, why don't you do the next Zoom on that? I mean, we hear Tatiana, but I would also love it if you thought of that as a topic.
Right. What I'm trying to figure out how to do. This book is called Trafficked Children, a case study. And Angela, probably I need your legal help with this, because you're not allowed to name the children or use photographs of them. This is kind of traditional globally in the law courts. But in this case, these children were actually brought from one country to another fraudulently by someone who wanted them to be put into orphanages and up for adoption. They were being trafficked, and she paid for their passports and their tickets to be brought with a promise of a villa and work contracts. And when they got here, instead, they were put in an abandoned house, and she kept photographing them, insisting on them being dirty for the photographs, which she would sell. And then she put them in a van. And then she wrote to the judges saying, take the paternal power away from the parents. I don't know how you would call that in English. And they've all believed her for 7 years. And we find that the children have internalized this sense of having been abandoned and treated badly by their parents when it was the trafficker that was doing it. And the parents live with me, and they're a lovely couple. They weren't at first, they were like wild kittens because they had been themselves abandoned, and they were very, very young. The Roma marry in the Indian mode as teenagers. And Diamanta had married at 14 and had her first child at 16. But now they're mature, she's 30, he's 28. And they're just they tell the most wonderful stories. They've got this whole library of stories, which are like stories in Apelles and Shakespeare and so on. And they would be able to give their children a sense of worth. Instead, the children, the social assistance gets paid €1,300 a month for each child. So they want the children for the money, and the children aren't loved. And so I'm trying to put this book together with the legal documents. I'm going to do the account in English, and then the legal documents with the names blacked out left in the Italian. But I think it's because it's the story like the lost generations in Australia and Canada, the children separate from their parents at the American border between Mexico, and what happened in Ireland at Tuam and so forth. And I think we need more of those stories being told.
So Julia, I'm going to send you the link to a documentary on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yes.
In the state of Maine about the removal of the Passamaquoddy and Wabanaki children back in the 50s and 60s.
Good. Yes.
They collected interviews over 7 years with the people who had been taken from their parents and the parents who had had their children taken from them. And it became a big commission report. But I think you might want to see it.
Yes.
Although nobody wants to know that it happened. It happened in my lifetime. It's totally shocking. But I think it'd be good for you to see it.
Yes. And it's something I can put into the bibliography too.
You could reference the testimony, the truth telling, they call it, of the adults who suffered that way.
Yes.
Because it was a very similar motivation on the part of the government. It was cultural genocide.
Yeah.
Eradicate the language, take the Indian out of the Indian, civilize. Anyway, it's done. It's done well. It's done well enough that you might be able to draw from it. I think it would add power to what you're doing, really.
Right. Because we know when the children, I mean, they were put into secret structures. It sounds like a bit like the rendering of the US government was doing with the Taliban people and so on and so forth. We were not allowed to know where they were. But a Romanian mother was in the structure and was a friend of the mother of Diamante. So she told her where the children were, and she told her that the nuns were shouting at the children not to speak Romani or Romanian, only Italian. But the children had grown up in Romania. They didn't know Italian. And, they'd been brought to Italy and then immediately seized by force and put into social assistance because of the money that would come in. And now they've been taught to hate their own Roma selves, and they've internalized it. They've only had 2 visits with the parents. The first one, they were joyous and sweet and affectionate. But the second one, they came with no socks on their shoes. They were dressed badly. Their hair was ungroomed. And the girl said she's 14 now, and this happened when she was 7. She says she doesn't want to go on living. And the boy is angry with the whole world, and you can see that they have been so badly damaged. But we won at the Supreme Court in Italy, in Rome, the Corte di Cassazione, saying that they could have visits with their parents. But the tribunal in Florence resisted the Supreme Court and says that the children should not have contact with their parents. So they've decided to sit down with the children and the judges and ask the children what they want, because they know that now the children will say they want to stay in the structure. They do not want to go back to their parents. So
Julia, is some of this, Julia has long known the story that I long knew a mother and daughter who were, she had political status because of, she came from Bosnia, but came in that underground way to Italy, and she had 2 sons here and then a daughter. And by the time I met them at the Innocente, it was just mother and daughter. And to make a long story short, the daughter was taken into social services. The mother, I have no idea, and the mother still has the 2 boys. And one of the things that I wondered about is, like, at the Innocente, people, come from all over Italy to try to adopt, and it's a 2 to 3 year process. They're so vetted. And I'm wondering if, in fact, so this girl who's now probably 19,
14.
my person.
Okay, right, yes.
If in fact this has been because of the adoption was much easier. It's much easier from social services, although everything about her would change. She was Roma but Muslim, so presumably when she's adopted, the name change, religion change, everything change.
Right.
But I'm wondering if some of this is also the business of adoption, in the same way.
It's lucrative. It's
Yeah.
lucrative. That's why they're doing it. This is what J.K. Rowling is saying with Lumos, that most children in orphanages actually have families, but it's in the orphanages' interest to have them be separated from their families. It would cost very little to have helped the parents of these 4 children, much less than it's cost the state to look after the children. I mean, I've been doing it with my social security, which is that's all I've got really. But the parents are so ingenious. They're so good at repairing things, at cooking from scratch, and so on and so forth. That they're not expensive, and And these are skills they could have taught their children, very good survival skills. But the boy only wants now to be adopted by a rich family, which is not likely to happen. They're too damaged, I think, to be adoptable. And when they're 18, they will be without citizenship. They won't be Italian. They won't be Romanian. They won't want to go back to Romania. And this is not in the best interests of the children. So I think those are the arguments that I need to make. Tatiana, what do you think on this? You've managed to keep your culture as well as being in exile.
Yeah, it's kind of very difficult, but I go back every year.
Yes.
And I want to preserve my roots and teach my daughter also about Bulgaria and everything. So, and we visited a lot of orphanages over there and places with old folks and tried to help them. And so it was probably they closed most of them. But it was tough, sometimes the Roma families would give their children there because they could not afford to raise them. Yeah. I don't know afterwards. I know that people from the States, go to adopt children from, I guess, Romania, from Bulgaria, or from Russia, and seems like it costs a lot of money, just to adopt a kid, $20,000, or it's just a lot of money they have to sacrifice. So I don't know. I don't know about this trafficking.
Yes, well,
it's an issue in America. My daughter probably knows more about this because she studied political science, more about that. But I'm just trying to, if it's possible, to help them a little bit.
Yeah,
if it's possible.
What I say to the Roma families is have both cultures.
Yes, absolutely.
But social assistance, as Laura has been pointing out, take the Indian out of the man. They have done everything to annihilate for these children their languages. They have two, not one. Their culture, their family, all of that has been taken. Laura. Yes.
Well, so one of the most powerful elements of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that there were social service employees on the commission who apologized and listened and watched these people in tears over many years, listened and transcribed and who spoke about what the policy had been and how sorry they were that because there was an act enacted again, similar to what you're talking about. There was an act at a higher level of the government that was supposed to be protecting the children, but it wasn't put into the behavior. It wasn't put into practice at the local level for many years after it had been enacted.
Right.
And they talk about that also, how we just went on going along with the way things we'd always done were done. And I think there's something so powerful about seeing someone who was inside that system enforcing these terrible rules come to terms with it and reach out to the people that had been hurt.
Yes. In the Italian Constitution is so beautiful. It's an extraordinary document. It begins, the first sentence is that it's based on work. And then it goes on to talk about that everyone should have dignity, that the family is they don't use the word sacred, but this comes through, that the languages, the ethnic differences are to be respected. All of that is there, and none of that is happening in social assistance. And people do say that one of the problems is that the people who work in social assistance are not very well educated. It's it's a nice job to get, and but without much background. And this, I mean, I found it really horrifying because they kept insisting that Diamanta, in her culture, a woman never puts on trousers, blue jeans. It's just absolutely unheard of to be transvestite. And they were insisting, and they also won't wear black unless somebody has died. And they were insisting on her being like the Italian women in black trousers. And finally, I rebelled too. And the last court tribunal hearing we had, weren't able to go to the last one because we all had COVID. But the one before that, she went in like a swan in her beautiful Roma skirt. And for the first time, she went in with dignity and presence. And I love seeing that. The way when she had to dress as a Gaji, you could just see the hatred of herself, the discomfort, and so I mean, I've just had to be sort of swimming upstream like salmon and so on and so forth in all of this. Angela, give us some advice from your legal mind. Do you think the book is a good idea?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think I've done a lot of work on the sex abuse in the Catholic Church.
Oh, good.
And
yes.
The most compelling stories come from the cases themselves, the litigation.
Yes.
Case after case. I mean, they're very difficult to read, but all the details are there. And courts, even the courts that used to say, oh, we can't touch the church because of autonomy and First Amendment, you'd still have all of that information, all the allegations. And then slowly the courts began, and I think it was simply because the stories were horrifying, relentless, and they were similar, and they were coming from everywhere.
Yes.
And courts began to change and say, maybe we don't need to protect the church's autonomy in this situation, and we can allow actions for negligent supervision of priests, negligent hiring of priests, that all these theories suddenly started to become accepted by courts in the early 2000s, after 15 years of litigation, case after case. So I believe very strongly that the more stories are told,
truth and reconciliation. Yes,
absolutely. Yes. This is exactly what, in Ireland and Canada and all of these, hearing the horrible abuse gets leaders to say, I'm sorry, and maybe to change. We'll see. We're still waiting. But I guess I shouldn't say that. There have been changes, institutional changes made for the better.
Yes.
But the church in America has paid $4 billion to, that would have been better spent. Well, there are a lot of better ways that could have been spent if families, children had been protected. But so I think, yes, absolutely.
Thanks. Yes.
write it. Yes.
Alex.
I just want to, something that Angela said, and it doesn't surprise me, Angela, that's the kind of work you've done, that you just seem like
I
somebody.
know. I'm so
such
glad
a
you told us.
Wonderful
Yes.
advocate. But I live in Boston, and so, which was the kind of epicenter of the child abuse that, in the church that was exposed, the Boston Globe, and, it was incredible. And so there've been a lot of good things. So I have to say that a friend of mine, an American who grew up Catholic, but lived in Bologna for a long time and did things at the university. And she and her daughter, on a separate vacation, on a different time, were in Rome, and they decided to walk into Mass. And so this friend was saying, why is this voice so familiar? It's clearly not Italian. I recognize that. What is the accent? And it was Bernard Law, who was the cardinal,
Oh, right. Yes.
who was taken in and given the most beautiful church, the poshest life, while still, even though everything Angela's saying is absolutely true, it is still, that's just the tip of the iceberg, know?
Yes.
But when she heard it, I thought, can you imagine that you go into church in Rome and then you hear Bernard Law, who left the country?
And I tangled with Cardinal Pell, who showed up here in Florence and threw me out of the Comunità of Don Diva Bassotti because he only wanted rich young men. And with the parable of the rich young men and so forth. Oh, that was really, at least I'd already lost my soul once. So the second time round, I sort of knew how to handle it a bit better, and I had this friend, she's Portuguese and the psychiatrist who was advising the diocese in Lisbon, the Patriarch of Lisbon. And she said, Julia, in the church, you must be on the fringes. Never try to get into the structures. And it was very good advice.
Well, it certainly keeps us on the fringes, doesn't it?
That's true. That's true. It's certainly not going to allow us in, but on the fringes, there's so much more space to do the real work. You can't. Power, it debilitates. It's a paradox, isn't it? So, and what can you add to this discussion now?
Well, first of all, to be on the fringes is you're quite free to move the way you want. And then you have to have ideas, and you have to have a goal, and that's what you have with Diamante. And so I think you're going to get someplace. But I think you need more examples, not just theirs.
More? I didn't catch that. Sorry.
More than their example. I think you need more examples.
Well, I think in this case, it is part of the whole. And I think in this book I can only concentrate on this one story, but it exemplifies all of the others.
Yes.
In the past, I've always told the stories of all of the families we've worked with. And this time, I think I just have to zoom in on this particular case.
Well, when I was guiding, I was a guide in Florence for many years. And when I had people who came from different backgrounds, different countries, even from Italy, and they hadn't had any idea of the Bible. They didn't have, they thought David was a king or something. No background whatsoever in another culture or in religious background of any kind. And this to me was very shocking. And so I very often said to them, what country does your family come from? Do you know the traditions of the family that, the country that your family originally came from? Of course, they didn't know anything. And it was very shocking because if you're working as a guide, you're usually working with wealthy people that want a private guide. And so You say, you're making all this money, but you haven't got a basis for anything. So I've experienced this, and of course, living here as an American, I've had to go through the same thing that Tatiana did, is living in two cultures, trying to amalgamate the two, and then just doing my own thing, because it's a whole process that you go through when you change countries or go through this. So Julia, you had to do this in many different times, and Tatiana had to go through this, and it's sometimes it's quite discouraging too. I mean, and we're people who are educated, we're people who have the means, we have the protection of the families, and so can you imagine if it's difficult for us, what it must be like for children who have, it's like flotsam and, what's it, the expression, flotsam and Jepson on the sea?
I can remember
So,
Angela in class in Princeton reciting Dante, because she's the the first generation Italian growing up in America, and I'm so this is so important that the two cultures having both. I found it very difficult in Colorado during the English only movement, when we were trying to, on the telephone, get people to vote it down instead of voting it in. And it was always those whose parents were immigrants who insisted on English only. And I felt so sad about the loss that entailed.
yes, this was in my father's family. Of course, there was a motive for that as well. But during the war, they weren't allowed to speak the language of the country that the family came from. I also wanted to say that my daughter went to a classical high school here in Florence, and the teacher told me that my daughter was not adapted at all for school because I had no culture, because Americans have no culture. And so my daughter repeated the year, and I insisted that she stay in the same school with a different teacher and prove the whole school that she was that
She's
she
a very
belonged.
bright lawyer. and, right.
Yes, no,
Yes.
she does rather well. In fact,
Yes.
she's a
Yes.
lawyer. So anyway, no, there are many experiences that we've all had, but the children like this have it. It's quite tragic. In fact, Carlotta does things with families that are breaking up, and the children are always the one in the middle that get thrown between everything. So anyway, these discussions for Julia are always so interesting, even when we go on to other subjects. They're always
Right.
so
We sort of
stimulating.
really digressed, but in a way, we sort of it hasn't been a digression. It really has.
No, it comes together.
And
Well, may I mention something? I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but there is international folk dance movement
yes,
throughout the world. And my husband has an organization, Society of Folk Dance Historians. And we're kind of working in that field and collecting archives and recordings and dances of every nation, including Roma. Bulgarian. I learned a lot of Bulgarian dances from him and songs here. I learned more about Bulgaria here than when I was over there, and appreciate it. So there are people that exist in America that are really appreciating the world cultures, and which but it's kind of going downhill a little bit. They're getting older, and it's kind of very hard to transmit to the younger generation, but still it exists. So there are different people, that's trying to promote the cultures throughout the world, and which is very good. And music, dance. the history of these cultures, so we can learn about each other and live in harmony
Yes.
and peace.
Yes.
Right. And Laura's background is interesting because it's both very New England and daughters of the American Revolution and Italian. And so you have the riches of two cultures, Laura.
Well, and I also, I was telling Julia this week, I did decide to join the Daughters of the American Revolution, even though I don't like anything about their politics. My mother really wanted me to do it. I went to an event and met a Passamaquoddy leader, and we figured out that his great-grandfather was friends with mine. And his work is transcribing the wax cylinders that were recorded in 1890 on Thomas Edison's first recording machine of Passamaquoddy songs and dances from northern Maine that were taken to the Smithsonian and put in a box for 115 years. And he now they've put them into digital format, and he's now transcribing them into Passamaquoddy, a language that didn't even have an alphabet until 1976. So he's just an amazing man. But he came to my great-grandfather's house, and he sat in the chair with where his ancestors sat 100 years ago. And I did a little Zoom recording of him talking about what it meant to him and what it means to him to have this relationship with the family restored and have work we can do together. So very, very wonderful connection. Just a wonderful man. So yeah, there's the English and there's the Italian, and then there's the places where my family was instrumental in founding the country. And guess what that means? They were also part of everything that happened that was unjust. And coming to terms with that is not easy. So meeting someone like that makes me feel a little more hopeful, because there's a relationship in present time and something we can do together to make things better. Yeah.
That is the bridge that Tatiana was painting. That is admirable, Laura. The opening to the opening to the other. Mm-hmm. Yes, which is what we've been able to do here, and I'm so grateful to you for this. And I think we have been at this for an hour and a half, plus an hour before that, because of the mix-up over Zoom. Didn't get it right, did they? About
No,
the European hours.
Tonight.
No, I was a bit surprised about that. And
This was wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very good to meet you, Tatiana.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good to meet you all. Yeah.
Yes.
Me too.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Julia.
Julia.
God bless you all.
And bless
Thank you, everyone.
Sonia Dora. Ciao.
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 Ciao.